I'm a big kid at heart. You probably haven't guessed that one yet. Anyways, I love the ocean. It's my happy place. And as a kid, now wait a minute, when I actually was a kid, I used to dream about living on the ocean, on the beach, with a bunch of islands that I could swim and explore and do all kinds of really fun stuff. Probably would still do it today. But anyways, now have you seen those pictures and videos of horses running on the beach? Did you know that most of those are the wild horses of the Outer Banks in North Carolina? In today's episode, Meg Puckett of Corolla Wild Horse Fund, she joins me. She's the director of herd management for these, about 100 of these completely wild Spanish Mustangs. Now here's something pretty cool. Aside from tourists coming to see them, who by the way, are only allowed 50 feet as close as they can get to them, these horses are completely wild. They swim from island to island, foraging for food, and really have never even been vaccinated. Now, if something happens to them and they end up having to go to the vet, they can't be returned to the herd. Now, this sounds kind of harsh, but think about this. It's really to protect them from the diseases passed on from domestic animals. Now, can you visualize this? Now, talk about an amazing life. Hanging at the beach and swimming from island to island. Now, my little kid in me just smiles. These amazing equines have a long history going back to the days of Columbus. We're going to get into that and so much more. So put on your little kid hat of yours and close your eyes and just listen to the story that Meg has to tell us. You too are going to be smiling all the way through. We are supported by PrepVet, providing stem cell therapy for pets.
As a pet lover, did you know your pet can benefit from the incredible healing power of stem cell therapy? Prep Therapy offers a groundbreaking solution taken right from your pet's own blood. Say goodbye to joint pain, arthritis, kidney and liver conditions, and more. They'll experience faster recovery, increased vitality, and extended quality of life without the need for surgery or harmful drugs. Put the wag back in their tail and discover Prep Therapy today at prepvet.com. Save 10% with promo code FurRealPodcast, covered by most pet insurance.
For real, 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 for real. Got a bunch of furry friends and I love them all the same. I'm an animal lover, veterinarian is the name. Let's share some pet stories from heartwarming to strange, losses and gains, from wacky to insane. For real. You're now tuned in to For Real with your host, Mark Kyle.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the For Real podcast. Today I have a special guest, Meg Puckett. She's the director of herd management of Corolla Wild Horses, the wild horses in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. Meg, I'm just so glad we got time to do this. And like I told you before we started recording, I'm going to go down all kinds of wormholes because I got so many questions. I'm really excited to have you.
Yeah, I am too. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to get together and talk about the horses here.
Well, I definitely want to get the message out there. Obviously, you know, as us humans seem to take over the animal world, we always seem to endanger them a little bit. And these guys are pretty special. So, and you've got that background, so I can't wait to dig in.
Yeah, me too.
So I was thinking about, normally I would get into your history, but I'm going to save you for the middle. So can you, for everybody that's out there, one is explain to everybody that they may have heard of the Outer Banks. Let's talk a little bit about the Outer Banks. Then let's talk about the history of the horses, and then I'm going to get how you got involved, and we'll talk about the fund and all that kind of stuff too.
Sure, yeah. So we're here on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. We're kind of at the most northern part of the Outer Banks. So we are, from the Virginia state line on down. The Outer Banks are a string of barrier islands that kind of run the whole coast all the way down to, the border of South Carolina. So like I said, we're in Corolla, which is about as far north as you can go on the Outer Banks. And we have a herd of banker horses here. It's a little over 100 banker horses here in the wild. And then there's another herd all the way down at the very bottom of the Outer Banks on Shackleford, which is Cape Lookout National Seashore. So that's kind of to give you an idea of, we've got horses way at the top and horses way at the bottom. Those are the two wild herds here on the Outer Banks.
It's funny because, I've always heard about him. I don't know that we lived on the East Coast. We used to go to Virginia Beach when I was growing up and Cape Hatteras and all that kinds of stuff. But I don't know that I've ever been to the Outer Banks. So I'm, just spending the time and looking at stuff. It just looks so cool there.
It is. It's an incredible place. I grew up here, so it's been a part of my life forever, and it still just never gets old. You learn not to take it for granted, because it is just such an incredible place. There's really nowhere else like it. On the East Coast, maybe in the rest of the country, I don't think. Especially places that you can go to see areas, that are shrinking, but there still are areas that are considered pristine from an environmental standpoint. So we've got that going for us, but then also the history and the culture here is really special and really unique too.
Well, you've got tons of history, back to the Columbus days, basically. And so let's get into that a little bit. Let's talk about, where your guys' horses came from. At least it's funny when you read about it, there's a bunch of different opinions, but I don't know anybody's really established the real identity other than I know you guys are doing DNA.
Yeah, we're working on it. So, I always start out this conversation with sort of talking about the Outer Banks and sort of that special history, because I think the horses are so, the story of the horses is so interwoven to that overall history of the Outer Banks. And a lot of the history that we have here is it's rooted in fact and history, but there's so much, lore and legend and sort of that sort of romantic idea of a lot of the history here, not just the horses, but we've got the Lost Colony and Blackbeard the pirate. And so, there's a lot of that going on. And I think that it's really important that you acknowledge that, you acknowledge the stories and the legends, because they're a very important part of the history, even if they're not, completely historically accurate. And so, just like Blackbeard, I don't think that Blackbeard actually swam around his ship,
Right.
15 times after they cut his head off. However, it's an important part of the story,
Yeah, of course.
and that's kind of the same with the horses. You hear the story that there were Spanish ships that were shipwrecked here. We're called the graveyard of the Atlantic for a reason, and that these horses swam ashore, and that's where they came from. And that's not entirely untrue. We do know that there were Spanish ships that had horses on them that most likely did run aground here. But that's really not how the whole area was populated with horses. It was actually done much more purposefully.
Hmm.
So, what we do know is the Spanish did reintroduce horses to North America, but they brought stock over, and then they started breeding them here. So they weren't necessarily sailing ships back and forth with livestock in the hulls just constantly. And they would have done that for a multitude of reasons. I mean, if they're colonizing, so they want to set up places like that where they are breeding their own livestock and growing their own food and all that kind of thing. If you think, I often think about when we have to trailer a horse somewhere, how much trouble that is. I cannot imagine putting a bunch of horses in the bottom of a ship and sailing across the Atlantic Ocean with
No.
them. Like, that must just have been awful for everyone involved, And so it makes sense that they wouldn't want to do that constantly. But there were certainly, we've got records of there being like laws, basically, that at a certain point in time, anyone who was coming over here to explore or do whatever, was required to bring horses or cows or pigs or whatever with them to help kind of populate with livestock. So that's kind of, how it started. And then they set up breeding farms in Central and South America and started breeding these horses there. And so there really was a thriving horse trade up and down the East Coast for probably 100 years, maybe 150, 200 years. And that's where the horses came from, and then, you get into all of, you've got English settlers and just as history moves forward and the horses were, more domesticated and farms were set up in towns and cities and everything. And so then you had not as much free roaming livestock as you once did, but that's where the horses came from. And that's what the DNA is telling us too.
Well, what I like about the story, it's kind, I I always talk about this stuff. I believe in magic just because I love fairy tales.
Hmm.
And it has a little bit of magic to it, I think. It makes it really kind of, it is a fairy tale.
Yeah.
Every little kid's always wanted to have horses, the ponies at their birthday parties, whatever.
Yeah.
But to think about these guys that are swimming from island to island and doing all this thing is just really cool.
It is. I mean, it's really remarkable when you take a step back and look at, how these horses have survived here for so long. I mean, it's from like a biological standpoint, it doesn't make a lot of sense. This is not an area where you don't, we're not out on the plains, right? Where there's like
Right.
big, prairies and grasslands and everything, and how these horses adapted to survive here. Not only they survived, but they thrived, for hundreds and hundreds of years. It is, it's I would say it is magical. I mean, there's definitely like the scientific and historical, how that happened. I mean, there's the facts, but like you said, I think that story, that magical part of it is really important. And I think that's what, it's what hooks people into caring about them, and wanting to know more about them and wanting
Preserve
to
them.
protect them and save them. Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. It's because one of the things I read was, I guess in the early like 1920s, there was, I don't know, National Geographic or something said that at one point there was like 5 to 6,000 of them running around.
Yeah, so National Geographic came and did it was a story about the whole Outer Banks, not just about the horses,
Right.
but there's a line in there, and again, they were, top to bottom, not just up here where we are, but the whole entire chain of islands, is what they were talking about. That, yeah, they said there were thousands of them, and that was before, so it was in the 30s when the Works Progress Administration sent people down here to start building up the dunes. And when that happened, that's when you started to see fence laws go into place. And there was actually a bounty put on any free roaming livestock, including the horses. And so that's when you kind of started to see the end of big herds of horses, cows, whatever, roaming freely on the Outer Banks.
Well, it's just kind of sad to me, really. I mean, I think I told you I was talking to the American Wild Horse
Mhm.
Group, and where there's there. Now, how much land? And you look about all those wild horses, and most people don't even realize there are. You hear about the Outer Banks maybe more than the ones roaming the West. But how much land is there actually there for the wild horses, in the Outer Banks area? And I love the term bankers.
Yeah.
I know you guys, that's a local thing, obviously. We don't know it.
Yeah, they've always been called bankers. I mean, that's one of the things that we're working towards with DNA, is we, to establish them as their own breed. They're not a mix of horses. They're not a strain of anything. They are bankers. Just like a golden retriever is a golden retriever. They are banker horses. So,
Right.
but yeah, so as far as the amount of space they have, so up here in Corolla, the wild horses here it's about 7,500 acres of land.
Uh-huh.
We are in a really, really unique situation as far as, people who manage free roaming horses in this country, and that our horses they live on land that is very, very mixed use. So there is protected federal property, federal wildlife property. There is state property, there's county property, but then there's also a significant amount of privately owned property. And the horses have access to all of it at any time. And so, we are often, working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife when we've got horses doing stuff on their land. We might be reaching out to private citizens if we have horses that are, in someone's yard that we need to deal with. So it's very unique. And it's also unique in that we are, as far as I know, one of the only or maybe very few nonprofits that are managing wild horses like this, without a lot of government oversight. So,
Good.
we can make management decisions without having to go to the Department of Agriculture or, the BLM or whoever to get approval for that. We do have a management agreement between all of those different entities that I was just talking about. So, we've got a signed management agreement between ourselves, the county, the state, and the federal government. So we're not operating in a vacuum. but management decisions ultimately come down to our organization, which is very unique.
So on the private thing, so people have they just donated land for them? Or are they just saying, I've got land, they can run on mine, I don't care? And how does that work?
No, it's actually developed land. So where the horses are, there's no paved roads, so there's no way to access their habitat without driving onto the beach and then back behind the dunes. It's all sand roads. So
Okay.
there's no paved roads and there's no commercial development, but there are a lot of houses. I think there are,
Right.
I want to say around 3,000 platted lots. Those aren't all built on, but they certainly could be. But yeah. So when we say privately owned, I mean, chances are there's a house on it. There is, there's plenty of land that's owned that's not built
Sure.
on, but there are a lot of houses, and most of those houses are weekly rentals. They're vacation
Okay.
homes that rent week to week. So you have a lot of turnover of people too.
So let's get to the paved road thing, because one of the things I read was that was a big problem at one point when they paved the road. But you're saying now it's not. So can you explain that to me a little bit more detail? Because I was kind of confused when I was reading that. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So the pave there's one road that goes from when you cross over the bridge onto the barrier island and you're officially on the Outer Banks. There is one 2-lane paved road that goes up north to where the horses are in Corolla, and that road has very recently been extended, up into Corolla. So I'm not that old. I'm in my 40s, and I remember when the road stopped way further south than where it is now. And over the decades, it just got extended further and further and further into the horse's habitat. And so in the 80s, that road was extended. The speed limit was 55, and so you had herds of horses living there that suddenly were having to deal with traffic like they'd never.
They never seen it.
No, never. And so with the road also came development, so there was an explosion of development. Like I said, in my lifetime that I very vividly remember the grocery store being built,
Yeah.
And so it was a very fast paced, development like that. And at one point, in the late 80s, early 90s, there were tens of horses. I mean, I think I want to say between 20 and 30 horses that were hit by cars over the span of maybe about 20 years.
God.
And that's kind of how our organization came to being was when that started to happen, and people who lived here realized, this is not sustainable like this. These horses need some protection and some help. And so that's where the beginnings of the Corolla Wild Horse Fund happened.
Okay, so help me here because I'm confused. Is it Corolla or Corolla?
It's Corolla. We all pronounce it Corolla, like RAH.
Spelled like Corolla, but it's pronounced as Corolla. Okay, because
Yep.
I'd listened to a couple of videos and I go, well, are they just spelling it wrong? And I'm completely confused.
It's Corolla. So if someone says Corolla, that you may or may not be corrected.
Okay, so if I say Corolla, shoot me down and right away because I'm going to make sure I say Corolla.
That's right. I always say I've got bigger fish to fry than that, but there are people that will correct you for sure.
You say Corolla, I say Corolla. I got it totally.
Yeah.
So getting back to the roads there, and you guys started in like the late 1980s. Is that when the fund started?
Yeah, it was very informal. I mean, that was at that point kind of a group of citizens that came together and kind of loosely formed not even an organization at that point. They were a group of people, but that was the beginning of it. Yeah.
But I've got so many things that, when you start digging into it, and there's all the different horses, and we're going to get to those too.
Sure.
Because all the personalities and that, which is really, they're individuals. And I love these guys. They're so stubborn because they just don't want to be corralled in Corolla.
Yep.
So that it's pretty funny. I mean, some of it's not funny, but when you're reading, you go, these are going, I don't care if you put a fence there. I'm going over there anyway. It's kind of cute.
Yep. Pretty much. Yep.
So let's get back. So you guys, so what happened is, matter of fact, I don't know. I had an episode with the Florida Panther Refuge, and the same issue they had as the humans are taking over in roads. When they have death of the Florida Panther, which is on the verge of its extinction, it's usually cars.
Yeah.
The same thing, which is just sad. I mean, and it's inevitable regardless, but it's kind of sad. So, anyways, you guys are in the 80s. You guys start this thing to figure out how to protect them. So one thing was walk through on the road and how you keep the horses from the road. I know that fence thing,
Yep.
the Iron Curtain deal, and all that. I know that's a big story. So I mean, that in itself is a story. So however you want to go, let's just go there.
Yeah, no, very much. So when and you kind of get into like it's like Corolla versus Corolla. It's kind of there's all these little nuances to kind of life here that it's kind of hard to explain when you're not here.
I get it.
But Corolla is town, right? That's like in
Okay.
town. That's the paved road. That's where the grocery store is, and all the post office and all that.
How many people live in Corolla approximately?
Oh gosh, I cannot tell you off the top of my head. Maybe
Okay.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I'd have to look it up, but not that many. Not that many for year round anyway. Yeah.
Okay.
And so, but there was, and so you have Corolla, and then you have where the paved road ends, and north of that is what we call it the 4x4, because you have to have 4-wheel drive.
4x4, that makes sense.
You'll hear it called 4x4, the off-road area.
Sure.
Whatever. And so that starts kind of at the edge of town where the paved road ends. And the beach goes up about 11 and a half miles to the Virginia state line.
Okay.
So you've got 11 miles of beach and about 7,500 acres of like property north of town proper, right? And that's where the horses live now.
Can people camp on that 11 miles?
You can't. No, you can't camp.
Okay.
You can park. I mean, you can drive on the beach and in like day trip, but you can't camp overnight.
Okay.
And so that in the mid 90s was when the fence was put in there at the end of the road that goes out into the ocean, and then it goes all the way across the land and then out into the sound on the other side. And then when that happened in the 90s, the horses that lived in Corolla in town were pushed north onto the 4x4. So but prior to that, when the horses started getting hit by cars, I mean, they tried everything. They would have people sitting out at night, watching the road to try and slow people down, move horses off the road if they were near the road. At one point, they were putting reflective collars on the horses, like around their necks.
Nice. I read that.
Yeah, which didn't work.
They were biting them off. Their friends were saying, "Get this off my neck."
Yeah, they'd pull them off, or they would just fall off, or whatever. And quite frankly, I don't know that even if they were on, that they made that
big of a difference.
Big of a deal. That big of a difference. And we've got letters and things from back then from people who are trying to manage this that are just it's heartbreaking, because you see them just begging. We need to do something. These horses are just they're just getting wiped out because of this. We need help from the government, from whoever, to try and do something to keep these horses here and keep them safe. And on top of that, like having to justify it too, because
Right.
these horses, like, they've always been here. I think, like, for better or for worse, they kind of got taken for granted, and they weren't really thought of. They were thought of as special, certainly, by people loved them, and cherished them.
The state horse, right?
They are now, but
Yeah.
but back then,
Oh.
not so much, and there was never, there was questions about, where did they come from? Are they really, something special, or are they just some farmer who turned his horses out loose, 100 years ago, and this is them, and so not only were they having to try and figure out, like, management, infrastructure, or whatever, but then also, like, justify why it was worth doing that. Why are these scraggly little horses worth all of this? And so, that was a big job for the people back then, but they got it done, and they got the fence put in and moved the horses north, and certainly cut down on a lot of the accidents like that. I mean, it still happens.
On the fence thing, one of the things I read, and I'm always careful what I say because it's the internet, so I never know what's right or wrong.
Yeah.
But I guess it was controversial at the beginning because it was done by either the federal government or whatever. Nobody had keys to get to in there or something, and then they gave like 50 keys or something? What's
That
that
was
for?
actually, so that's on the northern end. So that's up
Okay.
on the Virginia side of things. So if you go, like I said, you get off the road in Corolla, drive all the way north at 11 miles, and you hit the Virginia state line. When you hit the Virginia state line, that's now been established as a state park.
Okay.
And so it goes from a state park into National Wildlife Refuge and then into Virginia Beach proper. So that fence, and you people used to be able to, anybody could drive from Corolla all the way up to Virginia Beach.
Okay.
And so the people that lived up there, that's what they did. I mean, it's a lot still today, it's a lot easier to get to Virginia Beach from up there than it is anywhere on the Outer Banks. It's close.
Cool to drive along the beach anyway. So
Right, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so when that property, however, was turned into, and there people lived up there too, but then it was turned into state park, and so people lost their homes, they lost their property. Many of them moved down into North Carolina, many of them moved into Virginia Beach, and the fence was put in to keep people from driving through the state park. So that's where that came from, and so yeah, then they did give out keys to certain people who had property north of that fence prior to it being deemed a state park.
good old government. Anyways,
Yep.
so let's pause, and I want to get back to a lot of this, but let's talk about your background, how you got involved. I either heard or something about you having a picture, and I'm not going to even bring up that horse's name. You're the famous picture. We're not going to talk that yet. I want to save that. But that you had it, I guess, as a young girl. So
Yeah.
let's talk about you, how you got involved, and all that. And now you're the big, you're the director.
Yeah. So, well, like I said, I grew up in the area, so these horses have been a part of my life since I was a kid. And so I have very fond memories of going up to Corolla when I was a kid, and this was, before the fence was put in, before the lighthouse and everything was restored and all of that. And, seeing the wild horses there when I was very young. So they've always been a part of my life. And then as far as just, how I got this role, I've worked for nonprofits my whole career. So, I have a very strong background in nonprofits, which is very helpful, but I actually have degrees in English and history.
Yeah.
But I have had horses my whole life. So, I worked at a couple different history museums, in my career, and doing education and things like that. And then I also worked at, the Virginia Zoo in Norfolk before moving back down here to the Outer Banks. And so that gave me, a lot of experience working with a large nonprofit that does conservation, but then also, animal management and care, which was a really, really good experience to bring here.
So you brought it there, and now you're the director of herd management. So what does herd management mean specifically? I know we should get into the fertility thing and all that as well. It's really interesting to me,
Yeah.
but let's talk about that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot that goes on with management that people just don't, realize. You start talking about it and people go, oh my gosh, I had no idea you guys did all that, which is kind of the point. We want them to be wild and do their own thing. And we don't want to interfere if we don't have to. And so if people are seeing all of your management, that probably means that you're being a little heavy handed in it,
Right.
But yeah, so our goal is to keep each and every one of these horses wild. And, that's our mission. We want them to stay wild their whole lives. If we don't have a wild population of these horses, eventually they will no longer be the same kind of horse. They are what they are because of where they live and how they've adapted to survive there. So it's very important that we maintain a wild population. And so, it can be tricky because, like I said, we don't want to be hands-on with them. We only intervene in cases of life or death. Ideally, there's always exceptions to that.
Right.
But we don't want to interfere with their lives in the wild. At the same time, we are managing an endangered breed,
Right.
and so we don't want to lose very, very valuable individuals genetically if there's a chance we could potentially save them too, and so there's a lot of management that goes into habitat preservation and making sure that where they're living is safe. there's the breed conservation side of things, like you had mentioned the DNA that we do
Sure.
with population control. We've got a set amount of space that the horses can be on. We're working with lots of different people who have different goals for their property. So there's a lot of compromise when it comes to the size of the population and things like that. So and again, the management also comes into play when we've got a horse that's dealing with a medical issue or an injury that needs to be attended to as well.
Well, are you guys doing on the birth control thing? Is that the same stuff that the American Wild Horse guys are doing too? That
Yes.
the darted thing?
Yes. Yep. We all use the same drug. Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about that? If somebody hasn't heard that episode, they wouldn't know. So sure.
Yeah, it's called PZP, and it is a non-hormonal contraception that is reversible. So it's an amazing tool that we have, to be able to manage the population in a very responsible way. And so what we can do is we say we have a mare that based on her DNA and her genetics, she's very healthy. She's not dealing with any kind of like inbreeding or anything like that. And so she is a good candidate to produce foals. And so we can let that mare produce foals for a year or two, and then we can use contraception to give her a couple years off from having foals. And then if we decided that, our numbers are low, or we'd like this mare she's with a different stallion and we'd like her to maybe produce another foal, then we can stop using the contraception and let her start reproducing again. And so we can be very, very purposeful in the way we're managing the population. We can take, DNA and we can maybe target horses that might have genetic issues,
Oh,
So say we have a mare that comes from a line of horses that all have eye issues. We can work with our vet, we can work with the geneticist and say, look, is do we want this mare to breed? And sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is, what, the potential of a horse losing an eye is not worth, not letting them reproduce, if that makes sense, or it might be, yeah, no, you do not want this passed down. So let's make sure we contracept this mare, every year of her life. And so that way, we don't have to pull that mare out of the wild. We can just contracept her and make sure that she's not passing down, whatever genetics we don't want her to pass down. So it's a really, really great tool, not just for population control, but for breed management as well.
yeah, that makes sense. One of the things, so tell me if this is true or not. I guess the horses are all from the same maternal line, and there's concern about inbreeding and birth defects too.
That's actually, yeah. So as we've been able to get more and more DNA samples from the herd,
Hmm.
and build upon that kind of original work that was done, that was probably, I want to think that was like 2011, 10, 11-ish when they were first doing that work. We've actually found that we do have more than one maternal line.
Oh, well, that's good.
Yeah, so what we found is the levels of inbreeding are really not quite as severe, I think, is was once the concern,
Hmm.
based on what we're seeing now. And really at the end of the day, I mean, if you had horses that were that inbred, like they would have died out by now. If it was that big of an issue, they wouldn't still be around. So we certainly do see some genetic issues from time to time, but in the last, I would say about 10 years, it's not been anything that is that would be so damaging to the herd that we'd have to remove horses for it.
Well, I'm glad we talked about that because, again, it's what you read on the internet isn't always the real story. And, it could have been 10 years ago when that came out, so now I know, and maybe, the one or two people I talk in the world, maybe I'll tell them too. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, well, that's how science is. It
Yeah, exactly.
changes and evolves, and yeah, definitely.
I love that. So let's talk about because people can go on the beach with their on the 4x4 with the Corollas. I'm getting there. Um, when they go there, they can see the horses on the beach, and I know they have tour groups as well, but they're protected. Can you get into the feeding and the distance and all that kind of stuff too?
Sure, yeah. So these horses are not there's no state or federal protection for these horses. We do have a county ordinance that says that, you can't be within 50 feet, you can't entice them, harass them, feed them, that kind of thing. But it is very, very difficult to enforce. We've got hundreds of thousands of people that access this area every week in the summertime. It's a hard area for us to patrol. It's a hard area for law enforcement to patrol. So, we really rely on people to know the rules and understand them and follow them. Which, a lot of people do, a lot of people don't. And that's a big part of what we do, is just try to get the word out, because I think that horses are tricky because people have horses in their backyards.
Right.
And so I think it can be very hard for people to wrap their head around the fact that these horses really are wild. Your apple really will kill them.
Right.
They really can hurt you. And it's really important that you leave them alone, and I think, like, you go see a tiger in a zoo, even if the tiger is in a zoo, it's still a wild animal that can kill you, and
Right.
that can be tricky to get people to, like, fully understand with horses. So yeah, there's constant education.
Well, the thing that found really interesting, and it's, every time I read this stuff, I go, "Well, I should have known that because it's so logical." But because these guys are wild, they're eating the local grasses and stuff there, so their digestive system is pretty particular, and that's why you don't want to feed them the other food.
Right. Yeah. So these horses, that's one of the things that makes them very unique,
Uh-huh.
when compared to other breeds of horses, is that they can survive on very, very few calories. They are just not built to intake a lot of food. They survive on very, very rough forage that has very few calories in it. And so, yeah, anything outside of that diet can make them very sick. It can make them choke. That's actually, choke has been, like, the number one killer of horses that have been fed is choking.
Oh,
And so one of the last ones, the last horse that we had that died from being fed, was a young horse that someone fed a whole apple to. And so, he's not a domestic horse. He doesn't know, he needs to take a bite of it. He ate the whole thing, and it got,
swallowed it.
yeah, swallowed it whole, and it got lodged in his throat. And then it also can habituate them. So just like bears or, wildlife anywhere else, when they get used to being fed by people, yeah,
Oh.
things can get very dangerous. It can get dangerous for people. It can get dangerous for the horses. And so, there have been times when we've had to remove horses from the wild due to habituation, which, when we say, we really only want to intervene for a life or death medical situation, that's kind of one of the exceptions. And really, at the end of the day, it is life or death, but, it's not because of an injury. And it's just heartbreaking to have to do that, when it's such a simple thing for people to, like, not do, like, not feed them, but so it can create a lot of problems, not just making them sick, but there's a lot of other problems that it can lead to.
Yeah, one of the things that makes me kind of feel sad and bad for them, because if they get really sick and you guys have to intervene with a veterinarian, then you have to take them. You got to cull them out of the herd and keep them out. You guys have a rescue place, a farm that we can get into here in a minute. But once they're there, you don't want to reintroduce them back into the wild, because they can bring other diseases to these guys because they're wild.
Yeah, yeah. So we don't do any, like, routine veterinary care for the wild
Uh-huh.
horses.
Right,
This includes vaccines. They're not vaccinated, and that's because, again, the more you mess with them, the more you're going to start to change
right.
them. And so if you start vaccinating for stuff, that's going to change, their biology, right? And so, yeah, so there's always a chance you can introduce disease back to the wild herd. They also domesticate really quickly. So, if you're taking a horse out of the wild that needs a lot of hands-on care, by the time you've done that care, they're pretty well domesticated at that point too.
Yeah, and they're used to being hand fed where they're not
Yeah.
grazing. What I saw a video. I think it was probably a National Geographic video about them, which it was so cool. Where when they're grazing and they're on an island and they don't have enough, they'll swim to another island, which is so cool.
Yeah.
It's really cool. And then fresh water. Now I know that there's freshwater ponds or something around there, but can you get into how they dig for their own water and stuff? I mean, it's just fascinating.
Definitely. So the horses here in Corolla generally don't have to do that.
Hmm.
The Currituck Sound. So the Sound is on the west side of the Outer Banks, and then the ocean is on the east side. The Currituck Sound was closed off. The inlet was closed off during a hurricane in the 19th century, and so since then, the salinity of that water has been going down and down and down to where it's basically fresh water now.
Oh, well, that's good.
Yeah, so the horses in Corolla have, an entire sound of mostly fresh water that they have access to. So water's not generally an issue for them, but the other herd of banker horses down at Shackleford, that they are more known for digging. For water because there is less fresh water. But yeah, I mean, there's a will, there's a way. These horses are incredibly resourceful and smart and like good at problem solving. So, there's no doubt in my mind that if for some reason, they lost access to that fresh water, the horses here would immediately know how to dig and find water.
I just think it's just cool.
Yeah.
So now, and I want to get into personality of different individuals, but before that, I know you guys have like a rescue farm or ranch for the guys that you've had to take out because of whatever reason, because you had emergency situation, whatever, or they got hurt or whatever.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know when I was looking at your site, like right now during the summer, you have like Wednesdays or whatever, you can go and see them and all that. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So we, the Wild Horse Fund, since its inception, has always dealt with, injured horses. We've never let horses suffer or anything like that. But it's been only recently that we've had a farm that belonged to us, that we owned, that really could be a permanent sanctuary for any horses that had to come out of the wild. We've leased places over the years. We've had people that will take horses, from us that needed homes and things like that. But we were very, very lucky to be in a position to purchase this property in 2018. And so, since then, it's really become a place that, like I said, is a permanent sanctuary for these horses if they need it. But it's also become a center of education for us, and a place that people can come and get up close and personal with some of these horses in a way that they can't do in the wild.
Hmm.
And then, it also just tells the story. I mean, every single horse on this farm, I'm saying this because I'm sitting here right now, but every single horse on this farm was wild, and they were taken out of the wild for one reason or another. And so their stories are really important, and it connects back to horses that are still in the wild, so people can come here and they can meet one of the horses here, and then we can say, but his brother and his mother and his, whoever still live up in the wild. And so, that's why it's so important. And it really allows people to make a connection with them. I think that makes it very real and very personal. So this farm serves a lot of really important, roles when it comes to taking care of these horses.
And you get to educate people probably about the feeding and all that other stuff too, I would assume too. So it's really good. I mean, you're a history and English major, so you probably get to tell everybody a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, I think usually people are like, okay, we got it. Stop talking. Like, but yeah,
I get that
definitely.
all the time. I'm familiar with that one big time. So let's talk physical because they're smaller and can you talk about their size?
Sure.
I know I saw some alluding to them. They're not ponies, but they can look like ponies because they're not real big horses.
Yeah, definitely. So they are, they are when you're thinking about it in like modern horse like terms or whatever, like they are pony size. They are the size of ponies, but they do not look like ponies, except for the fact that they're short. But their conformation in general, the way they're put together, they don't look like ponies. They don't act like ponies. Ponies act different from horses, and these horses definitely do not act like ponies. So you'll hear us call them both. You'll hear banker pony, you'll hear banker horse, and both are fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with saying one or the other, but they're definitely horses for sure. And they're small. I get asked a lot, like, are they small now because they don't have a lot to eat out there, and just over the years, like they got smaller and smaller? And the answer to that is no. This is what they would have looked like
Right.
back 500 years ago too. People didn't want big horses. Back to the whole like bottom of a ship thing. Like you're not going to put a Clydesdale in the bottom of a ship if you don't have to. And smaller horses are just easier to feed. They can get around easier. It's a shorter fall to the ground if you're coming off of one of them. So, a smaller horse would have definitely, I think, been more appealing to, someone who was using these horses a couple hundred years ago, for sure.
And they have like one vertebrae less than the other ones or something. Is that right?
Yeah, that's been something that I think has kind of been hypothesized over the years.
Okay.
There has been some skeletal evidence of like one or two horses. I think we would probably need to look at a lot more skeletons to be able to say for sure that.
Yeah.
But it has been seen in the breed for sure.
Okay. Now let's get into some of your personalities, and let's start with Star.
Okay.
And because I loved hearing about all their personalities and their history. Again, give me a good story, and I'll be listening. So let's talk about Star.
Well, I didn't know Star. That was before my time here.
Well, you had a picture in your room or something?
I did, yeah. So Star was kind of, Star was like there's always certain horses that tend to be like
The Star.
the Star. Yeah, absolutely. For whatever reason, they're always out and visible. They're very striking to look at. Their personalities, like whatever. And Star was definitely one of them. And so he was photographed and put on the cover of Outer Banks magazine. And that was then turned into a poster that they sold and raised money for the horses. So it was like a big fundraiser. So like everybody had the poster of Star, including me. It had the poster of Star walking down the beach, hanging in their house. And Star was hit and killed in the early 90s. And that was kind of the catalyst for everything. I think like when Star got hit and killed, it was like, look, that's it. This has got to stop. They had been working prior to that to find a solution, but I think his death was like, that was it. Like that was what really made people put their foot down and say, we have to protect these horses. So
he was the poster child.
He was. He really was, and because of the work that the people back then did, we have like family trees, which are not really based in DNA because they didn't have that, resource at the time, but based on like their observations and things. And so we can trace a lot of the horses that are still alive today. We can trace back to Star. Here on the farm, we've got a couple of his grandchildren and great grandchildren. So, so that legacy like definitely lives on. He is very much still a part of the Corolla horses today, just as much as he was back then, for sure.
Which one was it? The little red man, or the one that kept coming into town stealing from the vegetable stand or whatever?
Yep. Yeah. And those are, you're talking about the picture I had when I was a kid. That's those horses. Yeah. So, he was born in Corolla. I think he was born in 91, 92, something like that. And they were moved north, and of course he didn't live north. He lived in Corolla, and so they kept coming around the fence after the fence was put in, and they were quite infamous. They learned that the Food Lion, our grocery store up there, that the doors were automatic. And so they would go up to the automatic grocery store doors and walk in and help themselves to whatever they wanted. They learned that if they turned around and put their rear ends in people's faces and kicked out at them, that there's nothing anybody could do about it. And so they kind of did what they wanted around town. Same thing with the vegetable stands and things like that.
Sounds like my son.
Yeah, right. And there was one time when some people were renting a house and they actually lured him up the stairs with a piece of pizza.
Oh, I read it. I saw that one. Go on, yeah.
Yeah, he climbed up the stairs and then fell and bashed his face open. And they actually caught him and stitched him up, and he was okay. But he was definitely, I don't know, they'll get labeled nuisance animals, which I don't think that's a fair term. But
no, I think it's a terrible name.
But so eventually in 1998, 1999, they decided, this is dangerous. This can't go on. And so they rounded him and his mares. I think there were 8 or 9 of them at the time, rounded them up, and they put them on an island that's actually directly across the street from where I'm sitting right now. I'm on the mainland right now.
Uh-huh.
And this island is out in the Sound. And so he lived there. He died in 2008, I think. And there were a couple of the original mares that were with him out of Corolla, and then some offspring that he had continued to produce after they were moved over to the island. And then in 2017, we were asked to take the horses that still lived on the island and bring them here to the farm. So they live here now with us.
One of the things I read I thought was really interesting is that when you get new babies each year, you start with the alphabet, and
Yeah.
which is like hurricanes.
Yeah, it kind of is. I hadn't thought about it like that. But yeah,
Yeah.
we actually started it in 2020, where we started with A because we figured it would be easy to remember that way.
Is it D or E this year then?
We're on E this year. Yeah.
Have you, and so you have an Edith and Ethel?
Ethel, yep, we've got Ethel and Eden and Eleanor,
Oh, that's
and
funny.
yeah, so it just makes it a little it makes it a little bit easier to remember ages once they get a little bit older, So if you say, oh, that's Amelia, 2020, so just it makes it a little bit easier to keep track of them.
So another thing, what I on your DNA stuff, which by the way, you notice it was in Texas A&M, which is
Yeah,
right down the street from me because I'm in Austin and they're in
yeah.
College Station. But I guess you're doing DNA of all the, I found this is really kind of fascinating. So you're doing the DNA of all the animals, so you'll be able to track their lineage
Mhm.
and who they came from in that. So you're really going to have basically a family tree for all these guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, again, like I said, the DNA teaches us a lot. I mean, we
Yeah.
learn a lot about genetics and, diseases and that kind of thing, but also ancestry. And that's actually, I'd mentioned our management agreement
Hmm.
that's between us and the feds and the state and the county. And, that's a big part of that management agreement too, is to establish the ancestry and the family line. And so we're working towards that. We've got a couple right now that we can trace back to great great grandparents, which is pretty cool.
So why we're here, so we're talking about, is there anything else you want to cover? First of all, is there anything you can think of that we should cover? Then secondly, whatever that is, let's stay with that. And then how everybody can help, how they can find out about you and all that kind of stuff. Let's go in with all that stuff as well.
Sure. I mean, I think when I'm talking to a wide audience like this, I think that,
Hmm.
number one, it's just important for people to know they exist,
Right.
and so to just sort of know that they're here, but then also to really understand just how special these horses are, from a historical and cultural standpoint, and how critical it is to save them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like once they're gone, that's it. There's no, there's nowhere else to move them. There's no, like where they are right now and as they exist right now is it for them.
It's kind of like our unicorn because of them living on those islands and swimming and stuff, I think.
Very much. I mean, and that's why they survive. I mean, there were populations of these horses up and down the East Coast, and
Right.
they didn't survive because of encroachment or whatever else, and
Uh-huh.
these horses are kind of like this outpost, of history here. And as we're not going to stop the development train, that ship has sailed. And so I think it's just so important for people to understand now that if they are lucky enough to be sharing space with these horses, like they are also responsible for their well-being and they are responsible for their care. We don't own them. They don't belong to the Corolla Wild Horse Fund. We're just here to advocate for them. And so I just think it's so important for people to understand that they need to be invested in taking care of them too, and making sure that they stay here forever.
Well, it's just kind of holding on a little bit of our magic,
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And you can't trust that somebody else is going to step up and do it. Everybody needs to
Right.
be a part of it.
So how can everybody help you guys volunteer, whatever, kind of go into, I know you guys are doing a bunch of different things. What would you recommend for anybody that's listening? If they don't live on the East Coast, but somewhere else, how can they be involved at whatever level they can to support you guys other than spreading the word?
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, that's first and foremost,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
is spread the word. We've got, our social media, we've got on our website all kinds of resources that could be very helpful to people. But I know this is like not the most exciting answer, but we're a 501c3 nonprofit. We are a very grassroots organization. We do not get any state or federal funding. And so, we rely on people's donations to be able to care for this herd. And so every time we have a medical emergency, every time one of our trucks breaks down, whenever we need to go buy hay for the horses here at the farm, that is all supported by people's personal donations. More than 80% of our funding comes from
Self-funded.
Yep.
So how do people find you, your website, your social media, all that stuff? So people, I'm sure on your website, you can donate on the website. Let's get directions to everybody.
Absolutely. So our website is just CorollaWildHorses.org. And, from there, people can find all kinds of ways to get involved, through donations. And you can even earmark your donation. We've got options to make a donation towards habitat preservation, towards the rescue farm, towards general operating. So people can kind of pick and choose, how they want to support. You can sponsor one of the horses that lives here on the farm and help us care for them. We do... you can leave money in your will. I mean, there's just, if there's some other way that you'd like to support us, you can give us a call, and we can make it happen. But I think probably going to the website and kind of checking that out is probably the first step. And from there, people can find all of our social media and everything too.
And for everybody listening, I pronounce it Corolla, but if you spell it Corolla, you'll find a Corolla Wild Horse. Because I say Corolla.
Yeah.
You may say Corolla, but I say Corolla now. But yeah, and that's the same for all the other social media channels, right?
Yeah. Yep. We're going to be Corolla Wild Horses pretty much across the board. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, so now we're at that part that we talked about where I tell the joke thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I know you're going to cringe, and everybody out there that listens, I know you're cringing already because I'm the one that's going to tell it. And I'm going to remind everybody, if you've got a better joke, and we all know you do, and you want your kids or a friend or whatever to do it, send an email to me at mkyle@forrealpodcast.com. Okay, Meg, here's my joke. Let's see if you can get this.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of that band called Fool?
No.
You haven't? Well, they have a huge cult following.
All right. That's a pretty good
Now
one.
you know what I mean. Anyways, thanks so much for being on. I love the story. I believe in magic. It's like a fairy tale. So for me, I was really excited to have you on. And I know you're busy. I mean, you're doing all kinds of things. And you taking the time means a lot to me.
Oh, well, thank you. I really appreciate the invitation to come and talk about these horses.
Well, and I'm glad you did. And for everybody else that's out there listening, please keep following, pass on this episode in particular so we can keep that magic. Listen whenever you can. And from the bottom of my heart, I really, really appreciate everybody for real.
For real, 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 for real.
We're supported by Let's Walk, that's here to love your animals like our own.
Austin, Houston, and Denver. Let's Walk is here to love your animals like our own. From daily walks, play, in-house sleepovers, and more. Go to work, out on the town, or take a vacation knowing your pets are in the best hands. This woman-owned small business does it all. Check us out on Instagram at Let's Walk Austin, Houston, and Denver.
That concludes this episode of For Real with your host, Mark Kyle. For previous and future episodes of For Real, listen via all major podcast streaming sites.